In the Ottoman Empire, justice was swift, and punishment was often brutal. Criminals, traitors, and rebels didn't just fear death, they feared how they would die. The empire had no shortage of cruel and terrifying execution methods, each designed to instill fear and obedience. Some met their fate at the hands of the executioner's sword, a quick but public spectacle meant to send a message. Others endured more gruesome punishments, suffering drawn out in ways too horrific to imagine. Feet shattered from relentless whipping, flesh burned away by scalding oil, heads severed in front of silent crowds. These were the grim realities of justice in the Ottoman world. Among the many brutal punishments in the Ottoman Empire, Flaka, more commonly known as Flaka, was one of the most agonizing. At first glance, it might seem like a lesser punishment compared to execution, but for many victims, it was a slow, torturous descent into permanent injury or even death. The method was terrifyingly simple. The condemned were forced to lie on their backs while their feet were tightly bound and suspended in the air. This position left the souls completely exposed, vulnerable to the wrath of the executioners. Using a thick wooden stick or a leather whip, the enforcers would unleash a relentless barrage of strikes, each one sending waves of excruciating pain through the body. Unlike whipping on the back, which caused bleeding and external wounds, Flaka targeted the nerve-dense soles of the feet, ensuring unbearable agony with minimal visible damage. The pain would intensify rapidly, causing severe swelling, broken bones, and even nerve damage. Victims often screamed in anguish, their toes curling involuntarily as the strikes continued without mercy. Flaka wasn't just used for execution. It was also a preferred form of punishment for thieves, prisoners, rebellious soldiers, and even disobedient students. In some cases, it was meant as a warning. In others, it became a death sentence. Some victims lost consciousness from the pain before the punishment was even over. Others, unable to walk for weeks or months, were left permanently crippled. In extreme cases, when the beating was too severe, the internal trauma led to infections or organ failure, slowly killing the victim long after the whipping had stopped. For those who survived, the ordeal left scars far beyond the physical ones. Even years later, many could barely stand, let alone walk properly. Some were reduced to begging on the streets, unable to work or escape the memory of their torment. If Flaka was meant to cripple, the torture of boiling oil was meant to annihilate. Among the most gruesome punishments in the Ottoman Empire, this method ensured that death did not come quickly. It came in waves of unbearable pain. As flesh melted away and the body succumbed to the agony, this method was reserved for the worst crimes: high treason, betrayal, and severe blasphemy. The execution process varied, but all versions shared one thing in common: extreme suffering. In some cases, prisoners were bound in place, while executioners poured scorching oil over their bodies. The hot liquid would instantly sear the skin, burning through layers of flesh in seconds. Victims screamed in horror as their skin blistered, blackened, and peeled away. In even crueler variations, the condemned were partially dipped into a vat of boiling oil, their bodies slowly lowered, so that the pain stretched over agonizing minutes. The shock of the heat caused muscles to spasm uncontrollably, and victims would often faint from the pain, only to be revived and subjected to more. For some, death came swiftly as the burns led to organ failure. But for others, the horror was prolonged. Even if the victims survived the initial burns, they were often left to suffer excruciating infections their bodies covered in raw wounds that offered no escape from pain. This method wasn't just about execution, it was about sending a message. The sight and smell of a body being boiled alive was enough to strike terror into anyone who considered defying the empire. It was a warning. Betray the Ottomans, and your end would be more than just death. It would be a descent into agony that no one could forget. In the Ottoman Empire, beheading was considered one of the more merciful execution methods. But that didn't make it any less terrifying. It was quick compared to torture or boiling oil, but the moments leading up to the execution were often the most psychologically tormenting. Beheading was typically reserved for high-profile criminals, including traitors, rebels, and disgraced officials. It was also used in cases of blasphemy and other severe offenses against the state or religion. Unlike in some European executions where an axe was used, the Ottomans preferred the sword, ensuring a swift, clean cut, if the executioner was skilled. The condemned were usually brought to the execution site, often in the presence of a crowd. Some beheadings were carried out in private, particularly for high-ranking officials, but many were public spectacles meant to instill fear. The prisoner would be forced to kneel, sometimes blindfolded, while the executioner positioned his blade. In some cases, victims were given a moment to pray before the final strike. But once the order was given, there was no delay. A single swing of the executioner's sword would slice through the neck, severing the head from the body in an instant. If the executioner was less skilled or the sword was dull, it could take multiple strikes, a horrifying reality that sometimes turned a quick death into a gruesome struggle. Beheadings were often performed in Istanbul's public squares, such as Sultanahmet Meydanı, where the severed heads of traitors would be displayed on stakes for days as a warning to others. In some instances, heads were sent to the Sultan as proof of execution, particularly when dealing with political rivals or rebellious governors. For the Ottomans, beheading wasn't just about eliminating enemies, it was a demonstration of power. The swift fall of the sword reminded everyone that in an empire ruled by the Sultan's decree, disobedience could cost you your head. Literally, these punishments served as a warning to all. Step out of line, and you wouldn't just die. You would suffer in ways unimaginable. They reinforced the empire's grip, ensuring obedience through the ever-present fear of pain and death. Today, such methods seem barbaric, relics of a brutal past. But they remind us of a time when justice was not about fairness, but about power.